Welcome to another episode of the Fascia Masters podcast. My name is Quinn Castley, and I'm the VP of Block Therapy, and we have Deanna Hansen, who is the founder of Block Therapy. And today we're going to be talking specifically about trauma. And this is a massive topic, so big that we even had a trauma relief summit that we hosted, and we had 13 experts around the world. 12 experts around the world.
Yeah.
And then we followed that up with a 90-day trauma relief program, which had absolute incredible success. So we're going to be talking about, of course, what is trauma, our view, our perspective on trauma, and most importantly, how to actually release trauma from the body. And we talk a lot about how we release it physically because we target the fascia system, which is physical, but it's still all connected to the mental, the emotional, the physical, or the spiritual, sorry. That was correct?
Mm-hmm.
So let's start off with the question, what is trauma?
So trauma is any insult to your physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual being that creates a moment in time where you have been insulted in some kind of way. So this always comes back to the breath. So pain, fear, and stress cause us to reactively hold the breath. So if I fall and break my leg, that's a physical trauma. If I'm heartbroken, that's an emotional trauma. If I am bullied or abused regarding my intellect, a sibling calling you stupid all the time, that's a mental trauma. If you have an experience spiritually, for example, I was brought up Lutheran, and I remember, up until about grade 8, I went to church on a regular basis because I was told to. Mm-hmm. Then I hadn't been to church in a very long time. And then the next time I was actually in church was for your brother's baptism. I'm your brother's godmother. So here we are in church, but the lesson of the day was if you get divorced, basically you're going to hell. And I had just left my husband, 6 months prior. So, I really found that to be an interesting moment for me because I'm thinking, wow, had I stayed in that marriage, I would have been so incredibly unhealthy as a result of the dynamics of that marriage. So that made no sense to me. It's like, I don't think because I made a really poor decision in my early 20s when I was a mess myself, that I am destined to have to live out that until one of the two of us dies.
Yeah.
That just didn't make sense to me because I don't think that God wants us to be that unhappy. No. And so, it really sort of made me understand religion in this specific way. And I know there's a variety of religions and they all have their different, rules and belief systems. But at the end of the day, that was my personal experience, and it just kind of shattered things for a while and really reinforced why I kind of pulled away from that. So anything where your belief system is shattered is kind of a spiritual trauma. So what's so fascinating about all of them is they all impact our breath, because whatever it is, whatever pain that we're having, pain, fear, and stress cause you to reactively hold the breath. And depending on the age that these moments happen also can dictate such a variety of things. Like if you have a trauma from the age of 0 to 2 or 2 to 6 or 6 later, that will be also very impactful because when we're developing and we have these traumatic events and our breath is compromised from that time going forward, it will also share different paths of how we view life as we get older. So it's truly a fascinating, interesting conversation. But what I think was most interesting for me after communicating with these 12 other experts is that whether it's a big trauma, something like you've witnessed a murder, that's a huge trauma, or you were bullied by a sibling, or you were called stupid, or you were called fat. These are potentially as equally devastating to the body and the fascia going forward and what can happen in your later life.
All on how, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's all in how you receive that trauma, because it's just an incident that happened. Sorry, not just, but it's an incident that happened, and it's really how you accept that incident. So if you called me stupid and I took that extremely personal and I'm like, I've been known to be smart, I worked so hard, like this and that, and like you really dove into like calling me stupid, you're like, you're pathetic, like whatever it is. But then let's say I'm also in the military or something, and then I've seen many people die or pass. It could have just been, unfortunately, just another person. And that trauma doesn't affect me as much. But if I got home from my service and then somebody said, let's call it a little t trauma, and it could have been like, you're stupid, you're pathetic, you didn't deserve to fight for our country, whatever it is, that could be like more impactful of a trauma or as equal as seeing someone as devastated as a murder. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Absolutely, because it really depends on how we pull it into the body and then what we do with that. And that's where the breath comes in. So we're sitting here talking. If you say something that I take as an insult, I pull it into my body, I can process it, and maybe there's some relevance to what you have to say. Maybe there's some actually nuggets of something that I should actually be listening to. But that's the whole point of the breath. We are these containers of body. So we pull in the information, we keep what serves us, but then with the exhalation, we release what doesn't serve us. However, if you insult me and I become hurt, like I'm a wounded bird from your insult, now I hold my breath. Now I pull in, I recoil because I'm trying to protect this vulnerable part of my body.
Like an energetic component of doing this.
Absolutely.
Which you're just going to kind of hoard it more.
Yeah, exactly. So like the deer who survives an attack, they shake. Where if we don't release what we pull in that doesn't serve, it gets stored. And again, because we're holding the breath, now we've locked the most important muscle in the body that determines how we age, how healthy we are, and we've locked ourselves in that space, and then we age from that point forward. So if it happens when we're 2 years old and we haven't fully developed, that's going to be a very different scenario than if it happens, say, when we're 25 and we're fully developed. Because when we're developing, always the most important thing is the breath, but especially when we're developing, because once we're an adult and we're fully developed, then we're going through the process of how can I stop aging? But the developmental process with breathing is so incredibly impactful. And those are those things that can really create issues like immune deficiencies. Because where people think that their body is actually attacking them, your body is never attacking you. Your body is responding to the dis-ease in your whole system. And if you have all of this dysregulation from a breath that has been compromised and you're growing from that point forward, that's going to leave you in a state where you're not feeling very grounded in your body, you're not connected. And then that's going to be really confusing spiritually as well, because if you're not connected to yourself, which is, if I personally believe God lives within, then we're going to have that feeling of not belonging to our own bodies. And then that's where, in my view, we can really have those issues where, okay, my body's attacking me because it's not even my body, essentially, right? Like it's this thing that's separate from your soul.
That's a scary perspective, or a scary thing to really believe or think that's going on. So we mentioned briefly, we have the physical trauma. Example can be breaking an injury, anything physical that has happened to you.
Yeah.
Mental trauma, calling somebody stupid, verbal abuse kind of thing. Emotional trauma. What's an example of emotional trauma?
A breakup. Yeah, breakup, a heartbreak. Yeah.
And then the spiritual trauma, which you mentioned. Now, these can all be intertwined.
Yes.
Correct?
And they are.
Right. So it's not as linear as you may think. So if I have a physical trauma, that could also trigger an emotional trauma because I was in so much pain, and then what I wasn't able to do when I experienced that, maybe that could be kind of caught up in the mix as well. Like, oh my God, like my hockey career's done. Like that's a very emotional time when you're trying to go professional in hockey, and then you shatter your ankle and you can't anymore. So that's where those two I can see being tied together. So what are some other examples of how they can be tied together just to create some relatability?
So as an example, one of our community members mentioned that when she was 10 years old, she'd sprained her ankle. And going through this trauma program, she recognized that that was the moment when she stopped being able to stand up for herself. So that's whether that's an emotional or a mental trauma, like you can kind of see like they are all tied together, because if it affects how you feel, that will affect directly how you think, and vice versa. So that's one example. But I mean, there's so many. And, just even being called like you're too fat, suddenly I can become that, right? Because as soon as I feel that way, okay, I'm too fat, I'm not good enough. Now my brain starts going and I'm holding my breath and I'm pulling myself in, and then I'm without that breath, we already know, because we've shared so many times, the exhale is so responsible for managing our size and shape. So something like that can bring it on. And then what happens from that? So that might be, so that was an emotional slight at me. Now I have this physical shifting of my body, which is going to create other physical problems. And then you just get drawn into this world, right? So it's absolutely fascinating to look back to the root of what has caused our suffering and what we're going to do about it. And it's amazing because it literally does get locked and tied into the fascia through the breath from that moment. So the right side of the body is connected to the masculine side. The left side is the feminine side. The liver stores anger. The stomach stores sadness. So let's say, for example, my father was abusive physically or whatever. So he comes home every single day. I'm going to go into this reactive posture because I'm scared. I want to protect this vulnerable side in myself. Mm-hmm. And if I'm always coiling over to the left because I want to keep that side of sadness protected from this fear of this invader into my energy world, right? That's going to cause me to continually contract, and like a clock over time, we wind down. And what's fascinating about the fascia too is understanding that it is a combination of collagen and elastin. So as we start tipping off balance, the collagen gets pulled over to where we're collapsing, and it basically builds like scaffolding or concrete walls to help us keep upright. But then that density drives it faster and faster down. So then that connects us to that thought pattern. So it's fascinating how the physical can cause the thinking to be a specific way, and then how that is in turn going to attract the same energy from other people. So if I'm always afraid, I have this expression of fear on my face if I'm afraid. And then if I look at you with an expression of fear, maybe I look more like a victim. So now I'm going to attract predators. Where if I have a really confident look on my face and I approach you and it's like, don't touch me, I have confidence, I'm probably not going to attract the predator. They're going to go after the weak ones, right? That's what predators do. So then if you are that, victim and you pull in more predators, then you have more assaults on yourself because you're actually magnetically pulling that same energy in that you're emitting. And that's the cool thing about the fascia too, is understanding that we are magnetic beings. So what we express energetically, which can often be seen on the face, like some people just have that angry look on their face all the time, or they look timid or afraid, but that's what you're going to be connecting to in your outer world, and then pulling more of that same energy back into your space to continually make that cycle stronger. Those tracks or grooves are going to get, more buried in your fascia, and that in turn is going to dictate how you think and how you feel.
So not to get too off topic, when you mentioned we're magnetic beings, and I know I've asked you this before, I'm just trying to tie a few things together of information I've been listening to. What do you mean exactly by we are magnetic beings?
Well, we have an electromagnetic field. We are electromagnetic. We are this makeup of electrons, neutrons, protons. We are. I
was thinking.
Yeah, we're magnetic. So if I'm emitting a specific energy, I'm going to be pulling that in.
And that's all coming down in addition to quantum physics, which is the most fascinating thing. I went really deep into quantum physics and energy and manifesting and of course, all about that. And it's really cool, how it actually works. But then when you actually tie that to the physical, and we do need the protons, the neutrons to do this and that. We need the certain electrolytes to energize the body. And then when we did that discussion with Gina Bria on the Hydration Foundation and how she was talking about the structured water and how it's a different molecular structure of H3O2 and how there's actually electrolytes stored within that, within fruits and vegetables and blah, blah, blah. It all goes on. And then she tied that all into the fascia as well, saying our fascias are hidden irrigation system within the body. And if it's dense, stuck, dry, not communicating properly, you're literally not distributing the minerals, the electrolytes, everything to the cell properly. And then that's also part of the magnetic system. So then it's almost saying that fascia is a magnetic system, or partially it is.
Well, it is. And I mean, like, you know, it's when you fall in love with somebody, it's like there's this magnetic pull toward that person. Like we are that. We relate to the world through the electromagnetic system. So what we emit is also what we're going to be attracting. And that's the fascinating thing. And it's really neat because we just finished doing our 30-day upper body challenge and we have yet to announce the winner. But when I was doing the estheticians webinar last night, we were prepping for it. And this winner is a before and after picture in this protocol. We ended up in this discussion about how it was her entire expression. I mean, like, there was so much change. I can't wait to actually share this with the world because it was so incredibly different, the before and after. But she emitted this look of peace and calm and acceptance. Like you would approach her. She just had this beautiful, spacious, calm way about her. And in the before photo, it was different. There was a hardness, an edge, an asymmetry. So like you could see the emotion that got stuck and trapped.
I can totally relate to that because, and I'm sure we all can who've been doing block for a while, but when you store a certain emotion for a very long time, it only will really accumulate, and then that results in physical expression. So then maybe, I remember you said that really heavy brow line, is that what it's called? Like it was heavy.
Yeah.
And you could notice, like everybody could. And then maybe certain areas in your face start storing it more, then in your neck, and then your shoulders get more twisted, and this is, and everything is all compromised. And sure, that could maybe start from the breath being restricted and work in that opposite direction, of course. But once you start releasing it and you work in these areas, just feeling that release physically can almost instantaneously cause an emotional release or a change in expression. Because if I'm looking kind of like angry, and there's a lot of the time where like I wasn't really angry, it's just that's how it looked because I went through many years of anger, and then that was just stored, and that was just my like neutral expression. But once you start actually releasing it, you feel literally different. Like it's almost like a dark cloud was lifted off, and you're just like, oh, why was I even like, huh? And then you're like, am I even the same person? Like I just feel totally different. Like I feel literally lighter, which is interesting because also when the connective tissue gets dense and it pulls you down, it can make you feel that you are way heavier than you are. So when you release the adhesions and the downward pulls all the time, you feel lighter, your expression's different, and you change. So when I did the combination of blocking, meditating, trying to change my personality to change my personal reality, quote Joe Dispenza, that was like a massive game changer for me.
Absolutely, it would be. And I think what's really neat is to understand that the cells in the brain are communicating together all the time. So when the heart is pumping blood and oxygen to all of the cells, if every single cell is open and receiving this energy, all of those cells provide information to the brain so that you can act in the moment. Whereas if we have adhesions and scar tissue riddled throughout the body, there are going to be a large percentage of your cells not receiving that energy or that life. So they're going to be not able to send that information to the brain. So now let's say you have 50% of your cells that are active in this communication between cell and brain. So there's a lot of gaps in the system. So that's where we get pulled into these repetitive behaviors, repetitive thoughts. And I know I've shared this a number of times, but it brings it so close to home because it's when I'm walking through that mall and I'm in a great mood and that man is walking toward me and we lock eyes and he scowls, and in that moment I get pulled into that feeling like when my dad was disappointed with me because that look reminded me of that. Now, fortunately, at the time I was going through my yoga teacher training, and what we were doing was we were looking at ourselves, we were looking at our behaviors and what was going on in the world. So in that moment I recognized, wow, like right now I feel acidic in my gut and I feel like my good mood just in a snap of a second was taken away from me. But I was able to say, wait a second, this has nothing to do with me. I don't know who this person is. And even if he did scowl at me, like, who cares? That's his problem. It's not my problem. And I was able to pull myself out of that negative thinking through the breathing, the exhaling, and then, talking myself through it in my brain. But it's fascinating how quickly we can get pulled into those negative feelings inside of ourselves, and it can stir up a whole scenario of reactions in the body. And that's why it's so important to really be able to understand that when we have a frozen diaphragm, we really have very little control of how we live in this world. When we take control of that breath, we change course, we change direction, and not that the external world is easy by any stretch. It can be extremely stressful, but if your inner state is at peace because of that breath, because when we breathe diaphragmatically, we keep the brain frequency in a relaxed state as opposed to a stress state, then we can look at what's going on in the world, even if it's really hard and stressful, and we can keep our inner state in a place where we still feel grounded and at peace for ourselves.
Yeah, you can look at it through a different lens. But yeah, it's interesting. You're almost like viewing it from a different perspective rather than like being in it and being like, oh, no, what's happening? I feel manipulated by everybody's energy and what's going on, where it's like, no, now you're stepping up and you're in control. That's an amazing place to be. Go ahead.
It's also being aware of how we're relating to other people. So at this similar time, I was with my ex-husband, and we were going through this yoga teacher training together. And we were having a discussion, and I was looking down as he was asking me a question. So because I was aware of alignment and all of these different things, my initial response to his question was to look up and answer. But I stopped myself, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to answer this way. I lifted my head, and then I looked at him with both eyes. I smiled, and then I answered. The answer was the same to the question, but his interpretation of how I came across with that answer would be very different. And that could have sparked him to, like, maybe he thought I was being dismissive because I was looking up quickly and I just had that look out of the corner of my eye, which isn't very pleasing or delightful in any way compared to a smile where I'm like really focused on you with both eyes. So now he'll feel heard and understood. And then that's going to change his response to me. And then, understanding this in communication is really key, because we can have really challenging relationships in life where communication is always hard. And that's traumatic, because if that's the situation with people that you're around all the time, you're always going to be in that position where you're feeling like you're being punched.
Yeah.
And we don't want that. We want to feel open and accepted and loved, and to be able to understand how to communicate in that way changes your entire perspective on life as well.
Mm-hmm. And even I can see if, let's say you're in a negative environment all the time and you're just getting pummeled and pummeled and pummeled, it could also, how I could see, almost change that person into turning into how they've been treated. So now turning into not the victim, but turning into, what's the word?
The abuser?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the abuser. Exactly. So then I can kind
of... The bullied becomes the bully.
The bully.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's probably a big scenario for a lot of people, especially when you're younger and you're growing up. You don't really know much better. Then that's how I can probably see a lot of people who were bullied turn into the bullier. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah. Or even like the victim continuing to stay the victim. I mean, how many people out there leave relationships to, only find another person with the same problems.
Yeah.
So it's almost like they have the same relationship over and over again, even though it's different people, because they're attracting that same energy, because they're emitting the same energy.
That's what they're familiar with too. They're not open to receiving something different that will change them for the better.
Because until you change the breath, you haven't changed your energy system. So if I'm used to being punched and kicked, and suddenly I'm in a place where I'm given love and compassion and attention, that's going to feel really foreign. And I mean, even though from the outside world looking in, you might think, well, obviously you want to be in that scenario. If that's not what you're used to, then you're going to go to what's familiar, as you said, because that's the magnetics around it.
100%. So you explained a lot of how trauma can be stored and trapped in the body, the physical, how it's connected to the fascia system, how we're, electromagnetic beams, etc. So now if somebody has been either suffering with a big T trauma or a little T trauma, and they need to actively start creating a change and create a release, what kind of protocol or what would you have that person start off with or do?
Well, and that's the beautiful part. It's really not a lot different than what we have laid out in our programs anyways, because the very first thing is we want to train them how to breathe properly. That in itself is going to start moving that negative energy out of the body. But for people that have had a ton of trauma that end up having diseases as a result of that, we're going to find that the extremities are going to be really, really hard. And like, for example, the calves, that tissue is going to be super hard. So if we don't have space, we can't release the energy properly and absorb the good. So making sure that the channels in the body in general are open, which again is how we lay our programs out, because we don't ever just address one area, we address the full body for that reason. And that's the important piece. So many people have rock hard calves, and that's locking your entire energy state into your body. Even if you do years of work in your core, if you don't change your calves, you're not really changing anything. And that's why it's so important to look at the full body as this interconnection, this communication system between every single cell.
And you've seen that over and over so many times that it's pretty well just proven to that point, hey?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, you got it.
What did you just do on the weekend? You mentioned about your sore neck, right?
Yeah, so this is interesting. This was probably 8 years ago, I'm guessing, when I was 20. And I was like really in my bodybuilding years. I was trying to shoulder press 100-pound dumbbells. And I think I was on like my 6th or my 7th rep. And then as soon as I dropped the weight, I just felt something was totally out. And I'm like, oh, this is not good. And that all started this like big kinked neck kind of thing. And I don't even know if it's my neck or more my upper back. It's kind of hard to pinpoint because there's a few spots. But then every couple or few years, it will re-trigger, especially after I'm playing golf. I'm swinging a club in one direction for however many months. Then you start weight training, whatever. It just starts to accumulate, and then you do the weirdest thing, and then boom, a little kink can happen. But yeah, I was working a lot in the area, but I was reading this new book while just blocking my calves. Probably spent 10 minutes on each calf, maybe longer. And I got up and I'm like, whoa, I actually feel like a release in my whole upper back and my neck. And it was just one of those aha moments, or not aha moment. It's like, okay, I know it works, but when you're in pain, you just want to work on the affected area, or at least certain cause sites in and around there. You don't think of working literally the furthest area away from your injured site. They're like, let's do it. And then when I had that release, I'm like, good reminder, you know? So that was really cool to see. And you've seen that with low back pain as being one of the biggest factors is twisted, dense calves. But anyways, okay, so going back to the protocol. So you said you really need to understand your breath, gain access to the diaphragm, understand like even just breathing in and out through the nose makes a big change as well. And then start releasing the connective tissue pretty well throughout the entire body, but you mentioned primarily the extremities and the calves. So then during this process, would you, like, what do you think of, like, if this is like an emotional trauma, let's talk about like an emotional or a mental trauma right now, because physical trauma, I don't want to say is easier to deal with, but I feel like from my perspective, it's easier to deal with. It's just the physical. You don't have to like start rewiring your brain. But if it's a mental or emotional trauma and you're blocking, what are certain things that you should be telling yourself or doing? And I'm not saying like, I know this isn't like your utmost expertise, but would you be doing while you're blocking or while you're actively trying to rid this trauma from you?
Well, that's a great question. And I think really part of this needs to be a bit of an individual process. And I remember talking with a family therapist that I had connected with last summer who dealt with trauma in families. And so one of my friends, she was her client, and she introduced me to her, and we got on a phone call. And so she was trying to understand this process because she goes from the top down. Like she educates people and works with trauma victims through discussion. So what she found, because the traumas that she was dealing with were like a lot of kids that were like sexually abused, just a lot of awful scenarios, to have a practitioner putting their hands on you when you might have been raped or you might have been hurt physically, that can be in itself triggering. So one of the really awesome things that I learned, or that she mentioned about block therapy that she thought was so valuable, was the fact that this is all self-administered. So for the first point, the fact that you're in control, we're giving you the control. No one's forcing you to do anything other than what you choose to do if you follow the program with what your breath allows. So what's really nice about that too is there doesn't have to be any pulling up a scenario or rehashing something over and over and over again, because when your fascia opens, so let's say again, I've been in this recoil because I'm trying to protect some soft part of me from being abused, and like I've locked it in, and now this is my posture. So with this process, we start opening up the tissue, we start exhaling. The lovely part is it's non-judgmental, because now we can move this negative energy out of the body without it even having to be a thought process. Sometimes we can have these interesting healing opportunities on the other side where, you know, maybe suddenly you have this surge of emotion where, okay, out of the blue, I just want to cry all day, or I'm driving and like I'm just really triggered with anger, or maybe I'm having some nightmares come up to the surface. So this is all stuff surfacing so that you can release it, but it doesn't have to go back and let's go and dissect exactly what happened to you, because you know people
don't really want to.
They don't want to. No, because there can be a lot of shame and guilt around some of these things, and we don't want to bring that back in. We want to let it go. And that's what's nice about this. It's not a specific, today we're going to target your shame. It's like as you're breathing and you're opening these areas, the body is naturally going to move that negative energy out of the body through the process of releasing the fascia and exhaling that out.
And it's very interesting how doing certain positions can open up an area of trauma, and maybe that wasn't even your intention. You're just blocking, maybe it was a trauma that was stored, you kind of got over it, but it's still there. And then you opened it up and now it came to the surface. What do you do in that moment if that happens? So let's say you worked in your left calf and there must have been some sort of trauma. Maybe you just sprained your ankle a few times when you were playing soccer in your teens or whatever. And then now you're 50 years old, you start working on it, you're ripping it apart, but then like it opened up to some weird energetic emotion that you just cannot handle. What do you do in that moment?
Well, I mean, of course, we want to stay focused on the breath. So when you're saying that you can't handle because of the energy around it or because of the pain around it?
More of the yucky energy around it. Like you blocked it, opened it up, and now it's just like I just feel gross. Like because that's happened to me.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, what did I just open up?
Yeah.
This just feels disgusting. Leave my body. Go. Like what?
Well, that's when you want to clean it out, right? Like that's when you really want to do the stuff. Well, I would probably jump back up and I would go into my lower ribs so that I can make sure that my diaphragm is really strong and open so I can move that negative energy out. I would also move. I would maybe, if it's my calf, for example, maybe I'll stand on my arch on the block so that I can open up that calf, because energy moves in and out through the feet as well. So if I can
have also like an intention, like a cognitive intention to say like, I feel this energy, it's time for you to leave. Like is there like a saying or something that you could rehearse?
Tons of things like that you can do. Absolutely. In the name of Jesus Christ, I ask you to leave, like get out of me, right? Like you, depending on your religion or whatever it is, because I've done some interesting work with some of these specialists that we interviewed, and there's a whole raft of different, you can tap, so suddenly it's like the energy has come up. Okay, well you can do some EFT, some tapping, and get that energy to move. You can do TRE, trauma release energy. There's a whole bunch of different techniques, and they all complement and work together. What's really nice about adding fascia decompression in is we ensure that space is there. So sometimes with some of these other techniques, because the body is so frozen and blocked and sealed out of alignment, if you start agitating that energy, it doesn't have anywhere to go because you're agitating it, but you haven't opened up the channels to be able to actually release it.
It's important to open up the physical.
Yeah.
Wow.
And two, I mean, as people dive more further into their bodies, your body speaks to you, your cells speak to you. So, you know, if you're really listening and you pay attention, you'll probably be called to, you know what, maybe my upper back is saying it's needing some time and energy right now, or I just released something that's causing a lot of anxiety. Maybe I should go and I should block my adrenal glands or whatever it is. So the more in tune you get with your body through this process, the more your cells teach you their language.
Right.
Like, and that's the cool part, you know, the cells have a language, but it's not like we were given any education on what that is other than, okay, pain, you know, if you touch something hot, pull away. But there's so much more. The cells communicate with us all the time, but we don't know what the language is because we haven't been trained in what it is, which is what block therapy does.
Yeah. I'll share that story actually that I went through, because that was like the first real significant, like big T trauma where I went to you for help because I didn't know what the hell to do. Like, it was just the most traumatizing thing. I'll tell it briefly. But long story short, me and my buddy were going to the lake, and then you're on the highway, of course, like you're going 1 to 120 kilometers hour fast. And then the car in front of us, there was a construction zone that slowed down to 80. That truck didn't slow down because they were distracted having a conversation. And then in front of that vehicle was a car, which was a mom. And then in front of the mom was the husband and the kids. And they also had like gas cans on the back of the SUV or whatever. So when the truck in front of us didn't slow down, it rammed into her. That rammed her into the dad and the kids, hit the gas cans, caught her on fire, and the whole like vehicle was fully engulfed in flame. Like, it was out of a movie. You're just like, holy shit. And then also just how the car was turning so fast, just the truck in front of us trying to dodge it, because the rubber was going so fast. Or this is where it gets a little blurred, but I just saw walls of fire, and I'm like, this is insane. So my buddy slammed on the brakes. I had a little water bottle with me. Like, what the hell am I going to do with this? But I brought it with me, and I started just charging after this vehicle. And when I got there, I saw the husband trying to like get her wife out, but she was like fully engulfed in flames and trapped in there, and the seatbelt like held her in. And then I see him trying to rip the door off, but then his hands like black melting off. And I'm like, what is going on? So I'm like trying to chuck this water on her like it's doing something. Then I'm like, I can't look at that. And that was like the most hopeless I've ever felt in my life. Yeah. Because you're just like, there's nothing you can do. She's gone. Like, she was so just in, it's so, So then I just remember like turning back, and you're on the number one highway. Like, everybody stopped, and I'm just yelling at people. They're like, fire extinguisher, knife, get a fire extinguisher, knife, blah, blah, blah. And then trying to get something. And then, God, like, she was in there for minutes. And then somehow they got her out, unfortunately passed the next day or whatever. It was just like really tough to see. But anyways, we all experience traumas. It's all shitty. It's all, excuse my French, it's all terrible to see, but it's also with how you deal with it. So this obviously affected me. And I thought like, oh, I'm tough. Like, I can like get over it, whatever. And it's weird how it didn't like traumatize me that much in the moment, because you're off so much adrenaline. Then you're at the lake, then you're like, what just happened? And then you can't really process it. But it was like a week or two later, then it started replaying in my head. Then it was you in the car, and it was being replayed. Then it was my mom in the car and then I'm like, I can't do this. And then that's where I would have like little freakouts and whatnot. So then anyways, so let's jump to it. So then I reached out to you, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. This is like pretty intense. So then, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember blocking a lot in like the belly, just where like, that was just sort of,
where you're feeling it. Yeah.
And just really focus on exhaling, and really focus on like, just kind of like intentionally getting it out of my psyche. Like, I don't need to be reliving this. Like, everything's fine. But then, and correct me if I'm wrong, because, and maybe we don't remember exactly like the protocol, but you said, take 5 things positively that you actually got out of that situation. I'm like, well, what do you mean? It was a negative situation. You're like, no, you have to view this from a different perspective to be able to actually get over it. So then I started thinking of like positive things that would have came out of it. Like, okay, I learned a lesson to always keep like a knife or a fire extinguisher. Don't be distracted when you're driving. Like whatever they were, I forget the details, but tried spinning it to something where it's not just extremely negative all the time. And then after just blocking in general and just having those conversations, it just kind of went away. And like, I can talk about it and it doesn't bring up like a trauma or anything. It's like, it's fine. But there's like maybe a 2-3 month period where it was like pretty bad. But
well, and that's fascinating because then on the flip side, you know, you can have something that isn't like those little T's, right? And for me, I get triggered when I feel like I'm being dismissed because that was how I was treated in my family, the youngest of 3 girls. And, you know, by that time, my dad was kind of like done. He wanted a son. So like, I'm sensitive to the, you know, whatever, Deanna, just go over there. Like just this dismissal. And it's interesting because something so little where if I get that feeling, it can bring up like so much negativity. And so it was great because one of our community members last year when we were going through this program, he had shared that he was really struggling with memories of what his dad and him, like they had an interaction when he was a child. So what he did was he went back into that moment and again, like reframing the space and time where this happened. He went back and instead of living the scenario that actually occurred, he, in his mind, lived the scenario that he wanted it to be.
Whose idea was that to do that?
I'm not sure. He shared with me this journey.
Brilliant.
And when he was lying in bed, he felt areas of his body relaxing that he didn't even know were contracted because it had been like that for so long. And suddenly there was this relaxation in his body because he was able to go back and view it. So even if you struggle to find the good in something that happened, if you go back and you take yourself and you relive it to a state where it's something that's beautiful and lovely, you can actually create a change. Now, of course, I mean, I say this, and there's obviously a whole bunch of scenarios and people living with extreme situations that, you know, it's not that simple, obviously, but that can happen. And, you know, when it comes down to it, most, I would say, addictions result from some kind of traumatic event because the addiction is leading you into a state of something that you're looking for that you didn't receive before. There's a gap. There's a hole in something. So you're trying to fill it in, and maybe it's sugar, maybe it's alcohol, maybe it's drugs, cigarettes, whatever. Working out, like anything can become an addiction if taken to a place where it's not positive. And so that's, again, we're always trying to fill in the gaps. But if we fill it in with life, with breath, and that's the beautiful thing is we open up these spaces that have been dark and pushed away from our psyche. So that's what happens when the adhesions get so built up is there's parts of our cellular structure that aren't even connected to us anymore. And then we literally have a disconnect from who we are as a human. So to be able to move into those spaces and pull that life back in and integrate it back into your being, it gives you this sense of fullness and wholeness that often gets shattered when we have, again, whether a little T or a big T, it can all really become the same detrimental path as we go through time.
Right. Wow. That's a lot of information. That just, even just thinking again on our community member who had to go back in time and reframe it. Like I totally see how that makes sense because to get a little bit more metaphysical here, there's no such thing as time and space here. So if you understand that concept and we're just experiencing a physical reality and it's given us the perception that there's time and space, but there isn't really such thing as it outside of this, then you can go back in time and completely re-change that situation because you collapse the time. Anything's just right now. So it doesn't matter if it was a day ago or 50 years ago, there's no such thing as that. There's no such thing as the time. It's just an illusion and a perception that we're experiencing that feels like it. So that's really cool.
That is very cool.
He was able to do that. I actually think that's extremely brilliant. I wonder if more people do that, if that's an active practice.
Well, and also if we actually experience something or watch it the brain doesn't differentiate. So let's say you're experiencing, well, isn't it? Because how many people are watching horror movies or playing video games where it's all violent and it's all killing and it's all this stuff? So your brain doesn't know the difference.
Video game out there,
yes,
that's a war game, Call of Duty. I don't know. I don't play video games really, but those are all war games. This could get into an interesting topic. We won't go there,
but that's the reality, though.
Yeah.
And that's how powerful the brain is, and what we are living. Because if you're playing that video game, you're going through it. You're going through the motions. Like it's
only getting more real now with the technology,
right?
Where the emotion's starting to get more and more involved.
And that's the scary part. Where where does life end and AI begin?
That's a whole
different story.
That's a scary thought and path that we're going down for sure. I think there's a lot of pros to AI, but there can be the most terrifying cons.
Well, and see, here's the dynamic of everything in life, right? Just like how you can go back and you can change a scenario by thinking about it. Everything has its pros and cons. So there's going to be that on every element and every side of everything. So it's a beautiful thought, though, and it's a beautiful way to approach life with the intention of healing yourself, to be able to go back and to view something in meditation that you want to happen, and then to move that forward. And in those moments, you can heal in a second. Like it's lovely and beautiful, and you truly can heal those quantum leaps of healing. In fact, right now I'm going through my own personal education. I'm working with this coach, and I love what I've learned. I've only had 3 sessions with him, but what he's teaching is we know that there's 2 sides of the brain, and they're both very different, but they actually have 2 very different personalities and 2 different consciousnesses, however you say that. So it's really neat, because in this process, I had to name them, first of all, the 2 sides of my brain. So now I'm talking to them, and then he asks a bunch of questions to both sides of the brain. And the answers are very, very different.
How do you ask questions to a certain part of your brain?
So I've named my right side of my brain Gwendolyn. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me why. He's just like, intuitively, what's the name of the right side of your brain? I'm like, Gwendolyn. I'm like, where did that come from? So I call her Gwenny. And
so I call her Gwen?
I do. And he said, if you actually speak to your 2 sides of your brain, they love it. And then and what's the name of the left side of your brain? And I'm sitting there and my eyes are closed and I'm trying not to force a thought or force a name. And I'm kind of pushing away like, Jeremiah. Okay. Jeremiah's the left side of my brain. So I call him Maya, or her Maya, whatever. So the left side of the brain is logical. It is focused on future. It is also one that is going to pass guilt. The right side of the brain, creative, intuitive, impulsive, feels shame. Now, both sides of the brain really have the same goal. And this was proven to me through the questions. They both want, your specific Quinn's life or Deanna's life to be good and happy, but they both have very different approaches. So it's kind of like, 2 people wanting to have a successful business, but both of you are like completely at opposite ends of how you see that's going to happen. So you fight. And then instead of coming together properly to create the best business out there, you're at war all the time. And then you don't actually ever get there because you're not putting your resources together. So it was neat because same questions asked, Gwenny, the impulsive one, was answering very differently than Maya, the logical, one that's thinking about the future, where Gwenny's thinking about the moment. So then he pulls these super meetings together where you have a meeting with both sides of the brain, and just the process itself.
That's crazy.
It was crazy. And then the next one, he had me...
Is this like through meditation? Like, are you in an altered state?
No, not really. It's just the communicating with the different sides of your brain. So then he had me go back to, like, let's find a moment when you were young that you remember that could have created like a scenario. So I shared a scenario, and so like what we just talked about with this community member, sort of similar. He said, okay, so go back to that moment that you think created this sort of unhealthy pathway for you, and come up with 3 alternatives to what that could have been. And give... And I also had to name this. Yeah, I won't get into the detail. It's fascinating. And once I've kind of gone through it, I'll share more about it. But there's so much out there that we can do to address trauma. But I did go through a massive quantum leap. I feel so much better. And I do believe I went through it that quickly because my body is open and spacious, and I was able to go through that breathing component and then be able to integrate this work really, really quickly.
Well, and even doing the trauma release exercises, when you were on with David Belinsky and he brought you through that was like a...
Berselli.
What did I say?
Belinsky.
Oh, I said Belinsky?
Because the TED Talk, or the...
Interesting.
Yeah.
Berselli. Sorry, David. So when he brought you through, it was like an hour. Was it an hour?
Nope, not that long, but maybe 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, something like that.
Okay, right. Then mine was, I think, really short. So he was saying how, like, for your first time ever doing this, how open you were and how everything was just working so perfectly and how you integrated the block with it, because it's pretty well, you're consciously trying to activate these tremors in your body that you're not really aware of. Like, I'm not thinking legs shake, arms squeal, whatever, but that will happen through this process. And then it was just really cool how he said, like, how open you were and how much it started in the legs, but then traveled all the way up into like your neck, your head, your arms, like your whole body was like performing the TRE like very, very well.
Like the deer who survives the attack, right? It's that shaking.
Right. That's like the TRE.
Yes.
But he was saying like how well that worked for you. And it's because you're just so open.
Yeah.
And that's literally like he bridged that together.
And that was really cool too, because also it was Dr. Eric Robbins, who's, again, one of our amazing community members, and he did the majority, or at least half of the interviews with me for this trauma summit. And he was sharing that when he was seeing Dr. Berselli as well, Dr. Berselli was amazed after Dr. Robbins started block therapy, because through releasing the calves, he was able to move the energy differently through his body.
Wow.
And so again, like, it really comes down to, if we have these bindings in our body, it's going to become a barricade. And if we have a ton of stored up energy that needs to go, but we've got these barricades, that's why some people can get thrown into overdrive when they try to do some of these techniques to release the energy, because they're so bound. We need to have an open system. And without addressing the limbs, the system's closed. The limbs are absolutely the holding pattern of the fascia.
Well, and it's amazing how just releasing my arm helped release my neck. Just all these little aha moments that just we keep reminding ourselves how connected we are.
Well, if you think of it too, like, I love showing that picture of smoke leaving the pipe, because where the heat source is, the wave, and then it starts to spiral as it gets cooler, and then it turns to chaos. So if you think that the diaphragm is the heat source, the calves and the feet, if you turn that wave upside down, the wave happens closest to the engine, which is the diaphragm. The further we get away, we get more into the spirals, and then the chaos is the calves and the feet. And then similarly, when we're talking about the upper body, again, the diaphragm's here. So then as we draw out to the body, it's the arms and the forearms and the hands that are in chaos. So again, it's those extremities, because they're the furthest from the heat source. So we can spend a lifetime in the core. And if we don't release that holding pattern, we're still stuck in what those limbs are locking us into.
Wow. Yeah, it's crazy. And it's amazing how so many people are getting unbelievable benefits, and the testimonials from the trauma and the trauma relief program and what people have gone through. Like, wow. Coming together as a community and finding these experts that all have a very similar intent to help people release trauma, that are open-minded enough to collaborate with other practitioners around the world to create this powerhouse to release trauma, is just incredible. So that was really cool how we did that. Next year, we're contemplating another summit, aren't we?
Yeah, and so we can replay or invite those same ones back, because we had some of, and thanks to Dr. Eric Robbins again, because he brought...
Would it be another trauma summit?
Possibly. I mean, there's no shortage of it in the world. So,
yeah.
And I mean, that was our first kick at the cat as well. So we'll only get better, and we'll draw more people in. And again, and I continue to refer people to that, because that program is still stored in our membership.
Yeah.
So it's not like people can't have access to everything and all of those interviews as well. So That's the lovely piece. But I mean, we're all still like trying to figure life out and learn more and how to be the healthiest versions of ourselves and how to just, feel joy in life. Because when you've got that PTSD or you've got that stuck negative energy, it's very hard to be present. And if you can't be present, it's very hard to feel that this life is exciting and purposeful, because you're stuck in that negative space that's not real. You're stuck and you're trapped in that frequency of the brain that is based in fear.
Excuse me. And it's one amazing, like the most amazing thing to actually like release trauma from the body. But then once you really understand the breath, understand trauma a little bit more, how it gets stored and trapped in the body, the different layers and the different bodies, I'll call it, such as the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, then when you experience trauma, it won't affect you as drastically compared to not being as conscious as you once were. That's another big thing I've noticed. So if something were to happen, or like, it's funny, I can get over things just a lot easier now. Mm-hmm. So if somebody calls me something or somebody does this or whatever happens, it doesn't really bother me that much anymore. Now, I haven't seen a traumatic event like I explained in this story, and I hope I never ever do again. But yeah, I just think you learn how to deal with the trauma, not by just saying, I'll deal with it, but it's because you're actually understanding the protocol to release it. So the sooner you can be on top of that, seeing like, I just saw something horrifying today, I need to release this from my body now. Then you get to work, then you know what to do. It's just like anything. It's like, let's say I didn't deal with my kinked neck. That could turn into chronic neck pain if I don't do anything. And then maybe 10 years later, I'm like, I should probably do something about it. Well, if I just dealt with it then in the moment, didn't apply ice, followed the correct protocols to actually heal it, then I can get rid of that neck pain very fast. I got rid of my kinked neck, 90% of it within 3 days, and I could not move. Like, it was really, I couldn't believe that it actually happened to me, to be honest. But at the same time, it creates a lot of relatability to me and the community and those people in pain. And it also, it's kind of like a little test, like, I'm going to throw you into like the pain pit. Let's see if how fast you can get out of this. This is going to be a bad one.
Well, and two, that's the cool part, because when you understand the fascia, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, as you said, like, you have this ability to, if you are injured or if you've had a toxic overload, you have this ability to clean the system out really quickly, to send healing agents to where they have to go. I remember one of my very first, this was a beautiful learning experience for me back in the day, like, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, when I was doing therapy on clients all day long. I started doing projects. Like, I wanted to dive in and see what concentrated work would do. So I ended up working on this gentleman who had MS. So tracking back to his past, okay, so like, let's find out what started the need for you to be in this situation now. And it was fascinating because, okay, so when did you start needing a walker? When did you start limping? So it started with a sprained ankle. And the sprained ankle never properly healed, which led to the cane. The cane pulled him down, which led him to the walker. That led him to a diagnosis of MS. It's like, wow, okay. Had that ankle injury been addressed properly, that might have been a 3-day healing event. And it turned into a life-altering disease for this gentleman.
That's insane.
I know. And I mean, there could very well have been other things going on, as I'm sure there were, but he was fine before that sprained ankle. And that was the journey. That was the pathway. And I've seen that time and time again. You know, we're labeled with things. And then two, the trauma of being labeled.
Oh, yeah.
And some people love the label. Some people are searching for the label. Like, you go all over the world to get the diagnosis. To what end? Okay, well, now you're labeled. Big deal. Like, do you have a solution and a path to get out of this situation, Sharon? Or you just have a name for it, so now you can settle and rest in knowing, okay, I have this, so now I'm okay. It's like, the label itself is traumatic because now you identify with that label. So if you say, okay, let's say I have labeled myself with MS, and we know that MS is, in part, it has to do with the myelin sheath. It's a breakdown of the nervous system. So if I call it one thing or I call it another thing, I can have a very different relationship to it. Do I have MS? Now I'm stuck in this disease that I believe that I have? Or do I have nerves that have breakages along the way that's causing a disruption from the brain to the muscle, and something that I can say, okay, this is what's going on. So now here's the path that I need to take to correct that. And we have a path for these things. So suddenly it's like, okay, that's not so scary. And the language can be traumatic. And that's what I find this world is full of. It's full of bodies trying to take ownership of something. So, I mean, even the legal language, I mean, my goodness, I understand the need for it to, well, not for the language so much, but for the legal world.
Yeah.
But why does it have to be so complicated? You know, like I look at these, they're the most insane thing. I get anxiety reading it because the first thing I know is I don't understand it. So as soon as I don't understand something, now I'm feeling like, okay, I'm stupid, I don't get it. And now I'm signing my name. Like, what did I just sign? Like, it's crazy, right? Like, so much in life I find from the perspective of trauma is man-made. If we can just simplify things, see what's happening, have a path to correct it, then we actually can make positive steps forward, and we don't have to get thrown into this really strange world that we're in. And we're in a strange world where, I mean, information is funny these days. I mean, like, you know, people aren't allowed to share certain things. And so it's funny, but this whole world is traumatic. So to be able to connect to yourself and to learn the language of your cells and to connect to your breath is where the truth is. And then when you hear what your cells are saying and you're doing it with positive intention and conscious awareness, now you're connected into your own self. And now we're here to do what we're here to do, which is hopefully make the world a better place. Because why else are we here other than to try to, you know, create a better society for those coming up underneath us?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's also like daily, because if you're experiencing trauma or having a difficult time, or maybe you have been on the other side of the trauma, it's also just keeping up with like a daily routine. It's not like I'm going to block just for the moment of when I have trauma with the pure intention of just releasing it and then say, no, I'm kind of done with it. It's like anything. It's like you want to keep your body out of pain. You don't just block once a month or only when you're in pain. You have to block all the time. If you want to be very physically fit, you're obviously going to have to work out more than just once or twice or once a week or once every 2 weeks. Like, hey, you want to see results? Go to the gym. Hey, you want to start cleansing your body? You can't just have one smoothie and expect your body to be cleansed. You might have to do it for many, many days, if not weeks. So it's the same thing. It's just you have to stay on top of it. If you're really trying to release your trauma, obviously stay on top of it, give it a good shot, and just do it until it's gone or at least mitigated to an extent where you feel significant release, and then stay on top of it and keep doing it all the time. And then you're only going to grow and improve as time goes on.
And that's the benefit of the community, because one of the things that was so obvious going through that together as a community was that suddenly where you think you're alone, because maybe it is a feeling of shame and we don't necessarily want to share that feeling with other people, but suddenly when other people start sharing it, it's like, okay, I'm not so alien over here. It didn't only happen to me. I mean, horrible things happen to people every single day, and the majority of all of us at some point in our lifetime are going to experience some horrible things likely. That's just normal life. So when we realize that we're not alone and we can connect with each other that way, we heal together as a community. And that was one of the most beautiful things from that program that we shared, was that I truly felt like we all took steps forward in our
100%.
in our ability to be healthier.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we shared a lot. That was an awesome discussion. That's pretty much everything for this episode.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, we covered a ton. That was a really cool discussion. All right. So again, if you're listening and this is something that's new to you, or you just found us, welcome. We're the Fascia Masters podcast, and our company's blocktherapy.com. And if you're looking to get started with your health, wellness, releasing the trauma, we've had a lot of experience with that, as you just heard, then you can check out blocktherapy.com. Or if you just want to be part of the community group, the Facebook community group, go to Facebook, type in Block Therapy Community. You'll see it there. Just request access. We'll accept you in. And you can find us on YouTube. If you're watching this, you're on YouTube, of course. If you're listening to this on Spotify or any other podcast platform. Check out our other social channels. We post a lot of content on our social media now and are really making that a focus. And other than that, have an awesome day, and we hope to see you in the community.